Time for some smooth jazz on Oldies 102.7. No, I kid, of course, but that's what that introduction sounds like. Though I love it. I can't say I hate it. I'm the one that put it together, so it's my baby. But anyway, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 209 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. I'm the only guy that's live today. Here I am out here hustling. The hustle never stops for me, as you know. But nevertheless, this should be a great episode if you haven't checked out the previous episode. That was with Detective John Beza, who was with the NYPD after a stint as a corrections officer first. He even worked in Sing Sing for a time. Then the NYPD, where he was a detective in both special victims and narcotics, undercover narcotics. And he's since become a teacher, teaching specifically the investigations into sex crimes, which is very important, of course. You want to especially make sure you get justice for victims of those crimes. So good talking with John. He's an author too, so we talked a little bit about that. And now tonight we talk with my next guest, who was a sleuth whose investigations took him across 2 states as a member of the Port Authority Police, New York and New Jersey, and across the world as a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. He joined the Port Authority Police in 1985. And I'm sure if you were to appear from the future and tell him the path his career would take when he was a rookie, he'd probably think that you were crazy. But nevertheless, he'll tell me about this tale tonight. That for episode 209 of the Mike the New Haven podcast is Detective Tom McHale. Tom, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Mike. Thanks for having me. How about yourself?
I'm hanging in. I was looking forward to this throughout the day, and after many, it's funny today. Even on a day off, I had to carry on the Hispanic tradition to cleaning. Usually on a day off. So the only thing I was missing is I didn't wake up to Spanish music blasting at 8:00 in the morning. Or even earlier than that. So, besides that, though, the tradition was upheld. So I'm doing fine. And on that note, I transitioned to the first question, of course, and that is, where'd you grow up, Tom?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Where'd you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in Jersey City.
Product of Jersey City. So did you always want to be a cop? You got some family on the job?
I had an uncle who was a Jersey City cop for a short time, very short time. But other than that, no. But yes, no family except my uncle for, like I said, a short time. And I wanted to be a cop and work construction. So I achieved both.
You did, because it's worth noting that you were an iron worker first, 1983 to 1991 specifically. And listen, nothing wrong with that. Construction is great enough as it is. Iron workers, though, I think, if I'm not mistaken, because the union is so strong, especially in the tri-state area, iron workers make a killing, don't they?
When you're working, yes. I mean, it's, feast or famine. My dad was an iron worker, my brother did it for a while, uncles or Dutch uncles, you want to call them, but it's, it's a tough business, but very, very rewarding, but if there's work around, if there's no work, it's not like an electrician where you can go grab a side job and work it, nobody needs, a skyscraper put up on the side, when you're out of work. So it's, but I mean, it is very rewarding. It was rewarding work indeed.
Because working in that tri-state area, I mean, listen, I don't know if you would ever go into New York City at all on construction projects, but it had to help being close to metropolis, like I've covered many times. If you did work in the city on construction, there's always something to be built.
No, not in the city, not until, of course, not 9/11, which we'll get into later on. But Jersey City for the boom, the waterfront. I was part of that with my dad and my brother. So I mean, we had our own. When Gerald McCann, the mayor of Jersey City, bought, he had the vision of developing the waterfront, and it came through. Thank God. And I was in Local 45 in Jersey City. That was our territory. So that bolstered us, and the work was pretty steady for many years.
We're talking with retired Port Authority Police Detective Tom McHale. Before I continue with Tom, more with him in just a second. Of course, a shout out to our friends tuning in tonight. As always, Jay Driscoll, he's always here. Ryan Menner, who's a loyal listener and viewer of the show, but this is his first time actually being able to catch the show live tonight. Ryan, of course, a police officer on the job. Thank you, Ryan, for what you do. Appreciate you, brother. Margot Lovett, tuning in via LinkedIn. Billy Ryan is here from the Arson and Explosion Squad, an old friend of yours. And he says you're a great detective and a great guy. Pete Pranzo, retired NYPD street crime lieutenant, is tuning in as well. He's always a loyal viewer of the show. And Joe Malik, another very loyal viewer of the show as well. And Howard Blank just tuned in, retired NYPD Taru detective. Good to see you, Howie. Always a pleasure, my friend. So tell me, I mean, listen, working in the tri-state area, maybe passing by the airports, either traveling, doing construction there, taking a flight out, or coming back in, maybe you've seen the Port Authority Police, maybe not. Tell me about how the pathway to them specifically started for you.
Construction. I started out as electrician's helper working in the Port Authority, where a unit called CMAC, Structural Engineering, blah blah blah. But they bounced around from Port Authority facility to Port Authority facility, doing new construction that was, allocated to them. So I was electrician's helper, and the foreman was Sal Artizone, and he's like, hey, the Port Authority police test is coming out, and I'm like, oh, and he says, 20-year retirement, they pay into your retirement back and forth. I said, oh, great. So I filled out the application, and at that time they had internal classes, which I made the third because I was a temporary employee. So my testing, didn't matter. They put me at the bottom of the list for internal employees, being that I was still a temp, even though I became permanent. But anyway, it put me in the third in-house class in 1985 into the PAPD.
So coming on, I mean, guys have told me, and perhaps you can confirm this or not, even if it's not true, but with the Port Authority Police of all, and this is all due respect to the other agencies in the tri-state, but they say as far as New York and New Jersey is concerned, that's really the best police agency you can go to because of what you just said. You mentioned part of it, but also full police officer status. You have authority across 2 states. I've heard the pay is pretty good. So is Port Authority, contrary to what some of the old school transit police and housing police guys have told me, is Port Authority really the best kept police secret in the tri-state?
As far as salary benefits, yes. We don't have any fancy names, but yeah, it was it was compatible to like Nassau, Suffolk, salary wise. But you can live in either state or Pennsylvania or Connecticut. If you weren't saddled as far as you had to live in either state. We had guys who did commute, from Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and further. The contract, of course, has changed dramatically since I retired. But it was, and the, just learning both laws, some very similar, some dissimilar, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work in both states. Thank God.
So coming on, I mean, whenever I've talked to the retired transit police guys pre-merge, I've talked about how the subway systems are, and this is true, are a city within a city. The same is true for any airport that you have in the New York, New Jersey area, Newark, LaGuardia, JFK. Same is also true for the train stations like Grand Central Terminal, the bus hubs. It's really a city within a city, not because you only have New Yorkers there, but also you have people from out of state, from out of the country there. And anything can happen at any given time. Tell me about, it's a very unique beat to start out on, but where did you start at first? Which hub did you go to immediately after the academy?
Newark Airport. So I was rookie at Newark Airport, and basically, you do traffic posts and the FAR, which was, the screening post. Some were fixes. We had to stay there. Others, you patrolled inside the terminal. We had People's Express takeoff. Pardon the pun, but back in 1985. So you had all sorts of miscreants flying and people who never flew before, and bringing guns to the airport, and gun in the machine. So it wasn't a gun run like the person is firing shots and all. It's but you had signs up that said no weapons allowed. With a gun with the red line through it, and people were like, oh, I can't, and they would pull their gun out, and so, I mean, really, it's like there's a box next to their door that says, leave brain here, you're going to the airport, and it was amazing how dumb people were, some people that weren't even flying were declaring their guns, and some legal, some not legal, but obviously carrying them was not legal, so that they would wind up being arrested, But so I did my first from '85, not a full year. You went into the pool after that in '86, the Central Police Pool, which sent cops to different different facilities in the Port Authority. I think at the time there was 13 or 14 different facilities, commands we call them. The city calls them precincts. We call them commands.
How long was it before you got into a patrol car?
Well, in the pool, it would have, well, the George Washington Bridge. If you went up to the bridge, you could wind up in one. But I'd say path like 86 going. They had the Avenue car, which later became my permanent post. The Avenue car, which at the Path precinct in Manhattan would cover from Christopher 9th Street up to 33rd Street Station, above ground, of course. You go up 6th Avenue, down 5th Avenue, make the loop around. And of course, you would back up the path units at the World Trade Center. So when I was in the pool, sometimes that spot would open up and I would jump into that. I worked study midnights, so it was, that was my introduction. And then, so in the pool, I worked out pretty frequently, and until my transfer into the Path precinct, and then I had the car pretty steadily, after that.
Bridge patrol as part of the Port Authority Police's security mission, safety and security mission, is very interesting to me because there's so much that goes into it. And it's not just a conventional, okay, if there's a car accident or if there's a suicidal person, there's a lot that you guys do. Some of it can be discussed. Some of it, obviously, for well-known reasons, cannot be. But as far as what can be, what is the main objective, well, besides safety and security, of course, what are the main missions of bridge safety and bridge patrol for the Port Authority Police?
Well, obviously, what comes to mind, and not being a bridge guy, but just working it, is the access. The access to sensitive areas, and all, up to and including the jumpers. I mean, they had an onslaught of suicides, and I mean, we even had one of our guys. Real decent cop, retired. He jumped off the bridge, which is really sad. So I mean, that's again, not being a bridge guy, I would think that has to be up there as far as trying to prevent them or intervene, and of course the drugs coming across in the pool when I was up there. Of course, was the height of the crack epidemic. So I would venture out into when I had the post in Washington Heights. It was a steady inside post, but I would venture out to get the crack dealers and the whole 9 yards. And that's actually how I met Mike O'Keefe from the 3-4, which I'll get into how he saved my butt in the 93 bombing. But that's how I first met Mike, and working in the pool, but up at the bridge, and of course the riots after the Kiko Garcia incident. We were up there from Path on loan to the bridge for the riots.
I have a question here from Ryan Metter, who, like I mentioned earlier, is an active member of the service. He says, and this is a really good question. Thanks, Ryan. Mike, can you ask if a collar is made in the PATH system in New York or New Jersey, or in New York, or / New York of New Jersey, I should say, where is the perp transported for processing?
Excellent question. And in New York, if when you made a collar at PATH, we had a processing area for PATH at the World Trade Center on the PATH concourse level, cell area, typewriter, print cards, the whole 9 yards. The evidence would be taken to the first precinct. The vouchers, would be obtained at any precinct, but the evidence would be lodged over at the first precinct, and you'd have to early on. You have to get over there quickly because they closed at midnight. When I first started down there, so that's how quiet it was back in the day. But anyway, you would process it at the PATH precinct and at the World Trade Center. If you had a McGilla, a huge case, which we had quite a number, we would process it at the precinct. We talked. We had like a multiple shooting, cabbie shooting and all. We got the perps, and there was unsolved shootings of cab drivers and all. So rather than go down to the path precinct, we processed it in the 6th squad. So our arrest, our collar, but the enhanced by the 6th precinct detectives. And that happened. Often enough. Whether it was there at the 13th, the South, we would be welcome there and process the arrest there. In Jersey, everything would path. It would come back to General Square. Whether it was a Harrison Newark arrest, you call for a transport. They'd pick you up. You would do the appropriate paperwork for that town, so the appropriate court would hear the case, but the arrest would be physically brought into Jersey City. The path precinct, which was in Jersey City, and we would process it there, and prisoner transported to either Essex County or Hudson County Jail.
Thanks, Ryan, for submitting that question. And you mentioned the 6th precincts. For those of you that don't know, it's in Greenwich Village, and that's where the bomb squad is, and has been for many, many years. I feel like not even working in the bomb squad, but just the 6th in general, you really have to have it made. It's such a great neighborhood. It's Greenwich Village. You're right by all the nightlife. You can make some great collars. You can make some great overtime. If I was a cop, I definitely want to go to the 6th.
Yeah, I was honored in September of '95 to actually receive 6th precinct cop of the month. So so I was my name's on the wall in the 6th precinct, but that was that was quite an honor.
A Port Authority cop getting an NYPD honor. I love it.
Yeah.
There you go. Well done. Shout out to a few more of our friends who tuned in that I didn't acknowledge initially. Brian Keller's here. Steve O, another retired NYPD member of the service. He was a lieutenant. And Billy Kennedy, retired NYPD emergency service sergeant, worked in 1 truck, 4 truck, 7 truck, and also the specialized training school. Billy, of course, a former guest of the show. And is always a big supporter of the show. Good to see you, Billy. Hope you're having a good day. So, as far as the train stations are concerned, I mentioned before, yes, I know the subways back then belonged to the transit police, and of course the elevated train stations in the 5 boroughs. I believe the transit police had some of them under their thumb as well, and they did a great job keeping crime down, especially once Bratton came in as their chief. But nevertheless, other stations in New York belong to you guys, and obviously all the New Jersey ones belong to you guys. I talked about it being a city within a city. So much is happening there. It is a target of terrorism, but also a target of pickpockets too, and anybody that could run any kind of scam at any kind of time. Tell me about train station patrol and keeping an eye out for the unusual.
Well, you would have guys assigned to the train themselves, one cop, on each train, which of course is called train patrol. Which I've had that post sometimes, and we'd have plainclothes occasionally, then through either contractual disputes with the Port Authority, they'd pull it, but then we had some lieutenants who disregarded that order, and when we had a rash of robberies or rapes, he wouldn't care what the policy was. He'd put us in plain clothes, at the path. But I mean, it was, your radios were really unreliable on the ground. When they fixed it, I think they put repeaters in. They didn't like the color, so they come in. They painted them over, which kind of quashed it. So the radio was horrible down there, and that was your main means of communication. Especially by yourself working a train. It was busy. You had you had a lot of wolf packs back in the days. We call them. Would come in. They'd prey on the gay community. That was a common occurrence, and of course they would come in from all ports. Jersey, not just Jersey, but Brooklyn and all. But they would take the path trains as well. From within Manhattan, and it was busy. It was a busy time. We worked hand in hand with transit when they were a separate entity at the time, and I just read that he was sick, but he retired as a lieutenant from 13th Wing Healy, but he was a sergeant in anti-crime, and they were tough competition. You know, I mean, if you didn't get to the call quick enough, you know, and they were anywhere near in the area, you know, I mean, they were an exceptional crew. But we worked hand in hand. We would go sign out a radio from the 6th precinct. They would do the same. So we'd all have communication, because if there was a robbery or whatever in the city subway system, they'd put it out so we could hear it, the city could hear it, and vice versa. You know, so we'd all have a central communication, so to speak. You know, so that worked out. That worked out well. I mean, transit crime is so good. At one time, either a gun was pulled, or definitely transit cop was assaulted. My partner and I roll up on 5th Avenue, and as they're chasing one guy, and we jump out, grab him, you know, and the first undercover on the scene, well, plainclothes guy on the scene, my partner grabs him. My partner thinks he's with the perp. He takes the plainclothes guy and throws him. And I said, no. I said, no, Bill ain't go. He's transit. You know, I recognize him, but you know, but of course, the partner was probably looking at the perp more. You know, but he, you know, of course, we laughed afterwards. But you know, that's how good they were. You know, they were they were a good crew.
And that's the thing about transit and housing back then, as I've covered before on this show and in a column that I wrote last month, is that when you have a small department like that, when you have a 36, right now the NYPD has 36,000 cops. When you have that many cops, naturally you have to pull them in different directions because the need for every command is different. But that was the beauty of housing and transit, where at their peak, housing had 2,700 cops. And at their peak, transit had 4,000 or just under 4,000. You could really focus on a specific area, and not just focus on it, but like they were able to successfully do, work it down to a science. Because and it's sad that they merged literally right after this. They really, 93, 94, reached their apex in terms of crime fighting capabilities and really had their craft, dare I say, mastered, and then they merged.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, Jack Maple was part of that, and and we lived it with him, you know. And I mean, we had a ringside seat for the transition, you know, from when they were, you know, they were looked down upon, and basically they were the rugrats of the police departments, you know. And then Bratton come in, we actually met Bratton. You know, we were going to our favorite coffee shop on 14th and 7th, you know, and pretty much started your tour. A lot of cars are there, you know, and Bratton pulls up, and even though we're Port Authority and the city, you still had respect. So like, you know, we scattered like cockroaches when the lights come on, you know, because he's like, no, guys, come back, you know, back. You know, he had the bars on and stars on it. So, you know, we started talking to him, and he's like, no, you know, what, you know, with that thick Boston accent, what can I do? So the transit guys were like, well, you know, our cards are dilapidated, radios don't work, you know, they have, we use golf carts in this subway, you know, and he did everything. You know, he really turned them around. You know, the transition was remarkable. You know, they came out pounding their chests, and you know, so to see that transition was remarkable.
I wish he had more time. He had more time when he was in LA, because he got a full 7 years. And I feel like that's the only job where he left after really doing everything he got to do, because both times he was commissioner in New York, 94 to 96, and 2014 to 2016 again, second time. He really he did well in those 2 years, but he got so frustrated by circumstances out of his control and things that really hampered him, that I don't feel like, for as great a job as he did, he got to fully do, and maybe even he'd agree with this, everything he wanted to in New York. You know, if you would have given him the full 7 years, I think 94 to 01 and 14 to 21, man, I really would have liked to have seen what he could have done for the city.
Yeah. I mean, even when you know, when they went to 9mm, and you know, I think it was Giuliani or somebody tried to stop him, you know, and he's like, no, you know, I'm the boss, you know, my guys are going to, you know, they're going to 9s, you know. So the city wasn't happy that transit was rolling over to the 9mm from the wheel gun.
No, and it helped. I mean, it saved a lot of lives. Undoubtedly, it definitely saved a lot of lives. A few more shout outs, of course, to our friends in the live chat. Pete Segretti's tuning in tonight. Another former E-Man, Angela Ang is here. Steven Zaslavsky is here as well. You Dizzy. Paul Pericone's here. Says, good man, Tom McHale. Good to see you, Paulie. He'll be back on the show soon. From my Bomb Squad miniseries, Tales from the Boom Room. And Frank T says, Tom, a great detective and a phenomenal defender of our national security. A real credit to the Port Authority Police Department and our Joint Terrorism Task Force. Good to see you, Frank T. Thank you for tuning in tonight. So, real quick before I get to you, a couple of things before I get to you, Make a Detective. I'll talk about the bombing of 93 in a second, but the World Trade Center, and unfortunately, when you say World Trade Center now, people only think of that one day or those 2 terrible days. Yeah. But really, beforehand, it was such a, again, talk about city within a city. That almost felt like a state within a state. Had its own zip code. I mean, you had upwards of 50,000 people between those 2 towers on a given day, and that's not counting the hotel. That's not counting 4, 5, 6, and 7 World Trade. I mean, it's a daunting beat, but it had to be a heck of a beat to work.
I don't know when you want to dive into the 93 bombing, but we would park the path car there when we're done at night. We park at the World Trade Center and for the next tour to pick up back and forth. So you can imagine how many times I was in and out of the parking garage, which was very useful for the rescues in 93. But and even working overtime at times at the World Trade Center, because they had their own Port Authority command in the World Trade Center, of course, the police desk. I wasn't fully aware of, how the city within the city until the 93 bombing. Well, I should say that was like a wake up, like, how many maintenance shops we had inside, and how self-sufficient the World Trade Center was from Port Authority standpoint. Like, they had everything and anything they needed right in those below ground offices.
Yeah, I mean, and that I do remember seeing that in a fire safety video from like 1993. It's of course, on YouTube as well, and it does showcase that they even had fire suits. They had firefighting capabilities because it would make sense before the FDNY would get there. You do want to have guys to at least contain the fire to a certain area.
Well, the Port Authority, you were trained in fire, and part of our academy training, you received, we went to Bergen County Fire Academy and fire suppression. But the World Trade Center guys were structural firefighters, as well as like the airport. Now it's changed where the crash crews are strictly crash crew. My day, the guys on patrol were crash crew. An alert would come in, plane having problems. The car would respond to a designated area. They'd suit up. They'd have one dash truck that was manned 24/7. That would go, but the rest of the crews, they were guys that were on post and would just change into their bunker gear on the vehicle on the way out to the the potential site or the site itself. So that's a very good point. That I didn't do that, but we had guys who did. And the trade center, like we were pioneers, like in high angle rescue. The guys at the trade center, John McLaughlin, who's portrayed in the movie World Trade Center with Oliver Stone. John was a pioneer and working with ESU and as far as repelling and the rescues that would be needed inside the World Trade Center. We had John Parker at PATH, who actually started High Angle Rescue, HART, I think it was. Before it was called PATH ERV, Emergency Rescue Vehicle, which predates our emergency service unit. But
I was about to ask you about that.
Yeah, John Parker. I was not part of that, but John Parker is the one who initiated that with Sergeant Patty Mullally, who's no longer with us. But they were pioneers in doing that. And Port Authority was, I'm pretty sure, the first to go to the level A suits. For the biochem suits. We were the first agency to do that.
I'd like to get a Port Authority email on the show at some point, because that must be, being a Port Authority cop is interesting enough, but being in the emergency service unit must be even more interesting. And John Latanzio, speaking of E-Men, former housing E-Man, and then also NYPD E-Man in trucks 5 and 3, says all the Port Authority air crash rescue trucks say police, not fire. And that's no dig at the fire department, but just put that out there. It does say police. I know what all the FDN and FDNY guys watching this, and I love them too, are going to say about ESU, which is they're cops that want to be firemen, to which now I have to say the ESU retort, which is, God created ESU because even firemen need heroes. There you go, John. So I covered both bases, and Paulie Perricone too in the chat, and Billy Kennedy, who are both former E-men in their own right. So I guess we can get to that day, 1993. It's a really crappy day weather-wise. It was sleeting. It was cold out, and Youssef and crew had come over from Jersey City. They had stayed there previously, then come into New York City. And I think they had a Ryder truck with them, as covered before. They had a really long fuse to light the explosives in the truck, lit it, ran around the corner, got to a secure area where they could watch. And then at about 12:18, I believe, according to Don Sadawi of the bomb squad, a good friend of mine and a key figure in that case, the bomb went off. And then I'll let you take from there.
Yeah, well, I was out from an ankle injury, like a severely sprained ankle. So I had like a open air cast on my ankle, and the Port Authority medical, if that's what you want to call them, were in the World Trade Center. And at the same time, there was promotional ceremonies that day for NYPD at One Police Plaza. My buddy Patty Golder from the 6th Precinct was made sergeant, blah, blah, blah. So I made my way over to the ceremony. Especially Michael Keith, and I'm like, hey, you guys going out for, some cold ones. He's like, not until this heat blows over from, the Kiko Garcia. I'm like, the heat, and like, I made a sarcastic comment, whatever. He's like, oh yeah, he goes, look at today's daily news. So on the way back to the World Trade Center, I'm going to get the PAD train to come back to Jersey. I see the daily, and it's front page Daily News. Mike McHale did a story on O'Keefe and the locomotion guys, the anti-crime guys in the 3-4, and I was like, oh my goodness, front page. So I pick up the Daily News. I'm reading that. Some guy asked me where the path train is to Newark. I point him in the right direction. He starts to walk away. The bomb goes off. I'm on the path concourse level, so there is no B3 level because it's a 2-story ceiling. So basically, I'm on the opposite side of where the van was parked. I'm on the opposite, so the walls blow out. The entire concourse fills with this rust-colored haze. It was like when you look through the top of a barbecue when it's on and everything's wavy from the heat. That's how it was, a wavy rust color that filled the entire concourse. And you inhaled that. I felt it immediately burn my esophagus, my lungs, and all. But then I went in and got a Scott Air Pack because, like we discussed a couple of minutes ago, we had firefighting apparatus, including Scott self-contained air packs. So I went into the path processing area where the prison cells were, donned the Scott Air Pack, came back out, uncovered this guy who was covered in concrete and rebar from the floors above, and this priest comes out of nowhere. I don't know how he got there so quick, but the priest comes over, and from my understanding, the guy survived. The guy that we tended to survived. But there was a Daily News, a New York Post photographer that snapped the picture. That appeared in the next day's paper. Me kneeling over the guy and with the priest. That wound up in the New York Post. But anyway, so I started, looking under the slabs of concrete, going down to the path level, and thank God a train that just pulled out, because if those people were on the platform or on the stairs, we would have had a lot more casualties than the 6 and 7, including the unborn baby. And I basically started going into the maintenance level areas, the area that surrounds the path concourse, after checking the track area and all, and and I believe it's an air conditioning mechanic, Saeed Hussein, Port Authority air conditioning mechanic, was like, there's people trapped, and that's when I learned of all these maintenance offices, and locksmith, carpenter, electric, all in the bowels of the World Trade Center. And even though he was severely injured himself, he was escorting us into these areas where the significant damage was. At that time, 93 was ground zero, and so we we started searching there for victims. Recovered two, deceased. Monica Rodriguez Smith, she was married, but the maintenance guy that knew her had just transferred in, so he gave me her maiden name. So I wrote down, Monica Smith instead of, Monica Rodriguez instead of Smith. And I think, I don't know if it was Kirkpatrick or Knapp, but another maintenance, but the maintenance guys stood with us. And, like I said, I was in civilian clothes. So they, I said, no, I'm a police officer, we had a multiple team digging through the cinder blocks and the crushed pipes and all to get to the maintenance workers. And then we were notified that a fireman had fallen into the hole, which was Kevin Shea. He came in from the opposite side from where we were, and the floors were just gone. Where the crater that the bomb created, and he fell down, and I'm estimating maybe like 3 stories. He goes down. We're on the opposite side. We see the fireman across the pit. I'm working with our ESU, Jimmy Wheeler and Steve Vitale. Unfortunately, Steve was murdered in Staten Island later on by a retired New York City cop, or road rage incident, which I had that case when I was with Major Case, but we'll get into that later on. And it was Steve Vitale. New York City Transit had their own ESU. And
emergency medical rescue.
Yep, and because Transit ESU had this ladder that snapped together end to end, and that's what we used to put into the pit, ground zero at that time. So they snapped the ladder together. They put it in. They tied lines off, and I was the one who brought in the Stokes basket, the orange basket, the rescue basket. So I brought that in, and I walked out on an exposed beam and lowered the Stokes basket into the pit that was completely on fire. And I believe it was Captain Fox from FDNY. They lowered him into the pit to put Kevin Shea into the Stokes basket. And then we pulled the Stokes bed with Kevin in it up the ladder to ours, to the level that we were on. I think it might have been B2. And we carried him out. And that's when the fireman wanted to go one way. And I go, no, if you go that way, we're going to be walking right back in deeper into the bowels of the trade center. We go out this way because that's where we parked the path car. So I knew where we were because it was pitch black. Somebody had went and broke the windows of cars and turned the headlights on so we could see, which was a great idea, But of course, that also disrupts the post-blast investigation because you think it was, the bomb that created, but no, it was, it wasn't looting, it wasn't. It wasn't the blast bouncing off the walls. It was just to turn the lights on in the cars so we could see where we were going. But anyway, we get out to like the VC Street entrance, 5 World Trade, and we put him in the waiting ambulance. And that's the pictures that were taken by, I think when they told Money Magazine. Right, there you go. And that's Kevin on the Stokes basket. The fireman, I just found out recently with the mustache, his daughter noticed it. He was killed in 9/11.
Gary Guidell?
Yes.
Yep.
So,
I know his daughter, Tilly.
Yep. She wasn't aware of this photo, and I sent her that, and it just, the pictures before and the pictures after. You could see Jimmy Wheeler's patch there, that on the left arm of Jimmy, that's our emergency service guy, Jim Wheeler. But that's us, but we had to take Kevin out through the 7 pipes with ice cold, I could say February, but the water was ice cold and it was pressurized, but that's the only way we could get out. So we actually had to walk through the waterfall, and I believe the fireman held, a helmet over Kevin's face so the water, wouldn't hit him directly in the face as we got through that and got him into the ambulance.
It's quite the story. The story.
And then,
go ahead.
And then the time I lost total track of the time because at one point Ron Napey, a police officer at the time, later detective, he has the kids, staged like on the upper floors, and Jim Wheeler and myself. Well, first we crawl where the coolers are, because Saeed Hussein is saying he's missing workers, and at this time it's flooding from that waterfall I mentioned. So Wheeler and myself are now hands and knees, but the water's up to our necks, searching for bodies, because Saeed thought that's where he last saw them. We didn't pull anybody there, and nobody was recovered from that area. Unfortunately, the individual that was working the security post, the Spanish, I can't think of his name right now.
Wilfredo Mercado?
Yes, he was buried underneath mounds and mounds of debris. He wasn't recovered until weeks and weeks later. But yeah, so Jimmy and I searched that, where the air conditioner coolers were, the whole 9 yards, and then like I took a break for I was drinking a Snapple or something like that, and I didn't even know what time it was. Later on, I thought it was earlier, and they're like, "No, Tom, that didn't happen." So your timing is off as far as when an incident like that, as it was on 9/11. But eventually, we start walking up holding up the stairs to get to Ron Nafee and the school children who were on the upper floors, and then we set up like the triage on like the 93rd floor with people who had prior conditions, and we had all the kids there, and we found like coloring books and juices somewhere in the closet. One of the places that the companies that were up there, one of the bigger companies. So the kids were good, settled, and all. And then we had a rescuer, a first responder on every other floor, because the stairways weren't lit; they were totally dark. So we had to station somebody on every other floor from like the 95th floor down before the kids can be escorted down. So once we established that we had personnel on every other floor, we started the evacuation of the kids and adults going down the stairs. And of course that took hours. But then there was those, I think, 23 people who could not make the stairs, and that's when I got on the city radio and called aviation, and that's the helicopter came to the roof. That was me talking to aviation, and I said, I have a list of I had pregnancies, asthmatics, heart conditions, and I had the list. And unfortunately, some of those that were on that list from '93 were killed on 9/11. But like the stair chairs and all that were needed. My Lieutenant Kelly was going to have guys bring them up to me to the 95th floor. Like, no, we got a helicopter coming up. Have the helicopter bring them up. We can bring, and we'll have guys carry the people up to the roof for the evacuation by helicopter, rather than. So that's what happened. So aviation brought the stair chairs and up to the roof. We brought them down to the 95th floor. I didn't carry anybody, but the guys that I was working with, carried those who had to be carried up to the roof, and they were helicoptered off. I believe it was 23 of them were helicoptered off to safety. And the last person down was an asthmatic. When the elevators were inspected, power was restored, elevators were inspected, and I think it was somewhere like around 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. We took the last person down from my floor, from the 95th floor, and got back to the precinct, and I still had the stains and everything on my face from the initial bomb. The bomb when the bomb went off, and of course everyone's going to have a cold one. I'm like, yeah. And the sergeant's like, "No, you're going to the hospital," And John Collins was one of the cops there. He's like, "No, you got to." So he took me to St. Francis in Jersey City, and I go in, and they check, and my blood oxygen was like in its 50s, and they're like, "No." So cut all my clothes off into ICU, and then I progressively got worse. I had hypoxia and something else, but it was basically my organs were shutting down. They were hitting me with the nitroglycerin, the whole 9 yards. Then I was transferred to the burn unit in St. Barnabas, and that's a funny story because the calls come in from the first deputy commissioner at the time. I forgot who it was, but it was Jack Casey calling, Sergeant Jack Casey, and of course I think it's Mike Walsh, Michael Mixon from the 6th Precinct saying that this is the police commissioner's office calling, So then, and I'm in ICU with nurses from my old neighborhood, Mary Ann Leach and ladies I grew up with are my nurses. And so I'm like, nah, so they're calling the station phone, which had 20-foot cord on it. I'm like, nah, it's my, it's my crew, guys, just playing practical. So I hung up, and then call comes back, and it's like, police officer McHale, this is this is Sergeant Jack Casey. I'm working for first deputy commissioner. My callback number is 212-374. So when he said all, I'm like, oh, Sergeant, I'm so sorry. I thought it was the midnight guys in the 6th Precinct, pulling my, but no, what, And at the time, we weren't really getting much help from the Port Authority, and they were, of course, still very busy with the post blast and all. But anyway, they were going to send the helicopter, but we had the snow. That's when we had the snowstorm. So we had to scratch the helicopter to transport me to the burn unit. So they St. Barnabas sent the ICU bus to St. Francis in Jersey City, where I was transported, and I remained there for like 11 days in ICU.
Steve-O in the chat knows you, and because he mentioned knowing you and your partner earlier, and he says he knows exactly why you were out. He says, as a reminder, Tom was out sick with an air cast on at the start of this day.
Yes, yeah, that was the ankle. That was responding to a call at 9th Street for a officer needs assistance, and I basically fell down the stairs going down on a call, and the only thing that hurt worse than the severely sprained ankle was police officer Danny Gardner from the 6th Precinct, when they were carrying me up the stairs back to the ambulance, was calling me all sorts of lovely names because I didn't make it to the so he's at, and the EMTs are like so here's his uniform, and he wore these wraparound like sports goggles, and Danny's a big guy, so he's in my face all the way up the stairs to the ambulance, tell me what I am for not making it, to back the cop up, and so it actually took my mind off the pain in my ankle because Dan was a bigger pain.
And Steve-O also says, knew Tom and his partner Billy from working in the 6th Precinct. We always work well with them and always welcome their assistance. Tom was a great cop and did have a nose for crime. And here's another blast from the past for you. Jerry Kane. Tommy's the absolute best street cop, best detective, best foreign agent. True story. At his retirement party on ADIC, I should say, of the FBI, called him a legend in the intelligence community, yet he's not wearing a tux.
Thanks, Jerry.
Good to see you, Jerry. He's tuning in tonight, of course. So, after that occurs, that really does change the nature of the game in terms of fighting terrorism, because it's not that terrorism was a foreign concept, not just in the minds of Americans, but even the fact that it could happen in America. There had been a lot of domestic incidents in the 70s and the 80s with bombings, but something on that scale, where the enemy is not some radical group from within, but somebody from abroad or a group from abroad. That was the first time you ever saw something like that. And so 2 years later, you do make detective and you go right to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And stuff is happening overseas, not just with 93, but as covered before, the same year of the bombing of the Trade Center, the helicopters are shot down in Mogadishu, I believe, or Somalia. They're shot down and 18 soldiers are killed there. In 1995, you also get a bombing at a Saudi training center where 5 are killed. I believe 2 of the victims there were Americans. And then we know what would happen in the years leading up to 9/11 with Khobar Towers, the embassy, attempts on New York in 1997. So I guess because of 93, is that why you wanted to go to JTTF?
No, and it's actually, I always wanted to be a detective. I passed the sergeant's test twice. I wanted to be a detective. That was my goal. But unfortunately, I wasn't too well liked within the Port Authority hierarchy of the police department. And that wasn't good. Even though I was highly decorated at this juncture, and even though I was injured in '93 and wound up getting the individual valor medal, and that still wasn't going to get me promoted. I was promoted almost 2 years after the '93 bombing, and it had nothing to do with the Port Authority. It was a sergeant from the 6th Precinct by the name of Frank Bruno, and Frank was there for a lot of my college. We were in foot pursuits together, back and forth. So Frank wasn't a Dutch uncle or a relative. He was a sergeant that knew me for the work that I had done within the confines of the 6th Precinct and the Port Authority. Frank becomes after a foot pursuit with an arrest. He's like, I'm getting off this job. I'm coming over to your job. I'm like, yeah, that's every NYPD guy's dream. I'm joking with them. Lo and behold, with the politics, Frank is appointed the confidential assistant to the executive director of the Port Authority. So basically, number 2 man in the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And he's like, yeah, he goes, yeah, we're promoting you, and you're going to go to the FBI in Newark looking for a Joint Terrorism Task Force. Or do you want New York? I go, no, I'll take. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Jerry Matthews was a chief who basically chiefs were allowed to have a list of who they want as far as detectives. So Jerry picks me as one of his picks, and he was a young chief, African American, and the other chiefs come to Jerry and say, no, you can't put that guy on your list. And Jerry's like, he is on my list. You choose who you want. Tom McHale's on my list. So he pushed back against the senior chiefs and kept me on the list. Although I was never going to get promoted in that Port Authority world. So lo and behold, Frank Bruno comes in, and he's like, and I get promoted. The interim chief or the interim director who was going to become chief, he has pushback from these older chiefs, and he goes to complain that you can't make this guy Tom McHale. It can't be done. And Frank says, have you read his folder? Did you read his? Did you? And he's like, no. He goes, well, I tell you what, you take this back and you read his folder, and then you come back and you tell me why. And he came back and said, I never realized that the guy did all this. And I actually gave him thumbs up when I was there. I never worked with the guy because he came from Kennedy Airport, but he had a very good reputation. But I gave him the actual the thumbs up, like, nah, he's got a good rep, the whole 9 yards. But he actually tried to torpedo me before I even got the shield. Yeah. So the day I was made, I skedaddled from Jersey City and I went right over to One Police Plaza, where Jack Casey had set up. Jack Casey from the '93 had set up me meeting with Chief Anamone and Deputy Commissioner John Timoney. That's who Jack was calling on behalf. So I went over to One Police Plaza with my brother, who was a Sarasota cop. He came up. They threw me a promotional party, and so I had my promotional pictures taken with John Timoney and Chief Anamone.
I've had Anamone on the show a couple of times. He'll be on the show again soon. He's a friend of mine, and I love that guy. Great guy. But that was the A team. Timoney, I would have liked to have spoken to. He's not with us anymore. He died of cancer a number of years back. But that right there was the A team, because that was the John Miller, John Timoney, Bill Bratton, Anamone era, man. That's no disrespect to anybody that came after. I just had Howard Safer on the show. Nothing but respect for him too. But man, that was in the '90s at least. That was the apex of the NYPD.
Yeah. So that, and then but the funny thing is, which may or may not come up later in the conversation, it wasn't a shoo-in. Ron Nesbitt, who happens to be the assistant director, later promoted on to assistant director that Jerry's talking about. Ron Nesbitt is the supervisory special agent of the squad that I'm going to if I make it to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. It wasn't a shoo-in. I had to go over with Jerry Matthews, the same chief I mentioned, who put me on this list. So Jerry brings me over to introduce to Ron, and I had to pass muster with Ron. It wasn't a shoo-in. Like, I had to tell him about myself. He had to meet me. So it was, a screening sort of, by the SSA, Ron Nesbitt, for me to get on to the JTTF, which of course I did. And Ron and I became good friends. Ron's no longer with it. He passed away from cancer recently,
I'm sorry.
but Ron, Ron would later become, a ADIC out in Seattle, and he would bring me and a trooper out to talk to the local departments why they should join the JTTF in Seattle, which he did. Ron was a great guy. But I'll bring up that point later on. But I just wanted to, it wasn't a shoo-in. I had to, pass now whether Ron did that himself, or which I believe he did, because there could have been any kind of screening for for some of the guys that came up there after me.
I have a few photos you sent my way. I just showed one of them with a 93 World Trade Center bombing and removing Kevin Shea to an ambulance. But we'll walk through some of them before I get to other questions I have for you. Here is the first one. Who's this?
That's Jerry Kane on the left, and his partner Mike Sasek on the right. That was at the Busick memorial dinners that we used to have in Jersey, like the Michael Busick Foundation.
Right. I knew Jerry on the left, and I knew you in the middle. I just didn't know the guy on the right. Look at look at that hairdo Jerry's got going on there.
Oh yeah, yeah. But Jerry and I, if we had something to do, like the following day, we wouldn't shake hands, because if we shook hands later on in the tour, either one of us would have a Megillah, we'd have a major, so if we had something important to do, whether it's family, something, you got something to, we actually wouldn't shake hands.
Oh my goodness. And here's another one. This is after 93, I imagine, right?
Yes, that's the Path Concourse. That's the Scott Air Pack on my back. I'm in talk about. There's that ring around my face that didn't come off for days, around my mouth and all. But yeah, that's the that's the Path Concourse.
And then this one, of course, this is from your JTTF years from 2002, right after 9/11.
That's St. Patty's Day in Islamabad. Church suicide homicide bomber that killed American mother and daughter, Christina Walmsley and Barbara Green, who worked at the embassy.
Terrible. Before I dive deeper into JTTF, you did have major case for a little bit, and one of the cases that you had a huge hand, your team did, in reopening and subsequently solving, I believe, was the murders of Foster and Laurie. Before you explain it, for those that, and most of you are familiar, but in the event that you're not, I believe it was Rocco Laurie, and I forget the first name, Patrolman Foster. Greg Foster. Yeah, they were on patrol, and this was during the time when many police officers were being shot, seriously injured, if not killed, in assassination attempts nationwide by various radical groups. And Foster and Laurie, who were partners in Vietnam, became partners on the NYPD, were just simply doing their jobs on patrol and were ambushed and assassinated simply because of the uniform that they wore. This was a shocking murder. Even for the climate at the time, this was heartbreaking to see these two friends who worked together and ultimately died together so tragically. And 20-something years later, you open this case. It's personal regardless because it's a fellow cop, but I imagine there was an added incentive given how brutally they were murdered.
Yes, there was. But just a point of historical accuracy, they weren't partners in Vietnam.
I thought they were. My bad.
They did say that so they could work together.
Oh,
they did tell the desk sergeant that, but no, they were in actually two different units in two separate areas of Vietnam. Greg was awarded the Silver Star, which I obtained a copy of the citation and gave it to his dad. When his dad was alive. But prior to Foster and Laurie, I was working the Green homicide. What happened was two Brooklyn detectives arrested Freddie Hilton, BLA member for child molestation and all, 1999 I guess, or 2000. Anyway, they arrest Freddie Hilton, and they call Tom Nerney, legendary major case detective who we became partners. But they called Tom Nerney about Freddie Hilton, and Tom's like, look, I can only give you around about my buddy Tom McHale, because I worked Joanne Chesmont on the JTTF. So I'm like, yeah, I can prepare something for them to tell them who Fred Hilton was, back, blah, blah. And in doing so, I go into a storage unit, and it's not a file room, but it's actually a storage unit. And I find the actual handwritten notepad, and part of the notes is the homicide in Atlanta, but no name. It's the date involving Freddie Hilton, Twyman Myers, notorious cop killer, back and forth. Long story short, I had previously worked the cold case homicide of Attilio Sakala in Newark, which brought me down to Atlanta. He was killed by the Yahweh Ben Yahwehs, an actual serial murderer by the name of Robert Rozier, killed Attilio Sakala in July of 1984. So I go down to Atlanta and investigating the Yahweh's sect that was down there back and forth. So I meet homicide detectives from Atlanta back and forth. So now, fast forward, after solving that case, back to helping out the Brooklyn detectives, I find this affidavit, the notes for an affidavit for a warrant. So I call down to Atlanta to the sergeant. I'm like, hey, listen, I says, I tell him what's going on. I go, do you have an unsolved, a cop was killed in a van, and it gave you the detail, but didn't give you his name. So they're like, no, we don't have any unsolved. I go, just, do me a favor, can you check and all? So he goes down, and and this is eerily like 1971, the murders of Piagetini and Jones, when the BLA members who were locked up in San Francisco for trying to shoot Sergeant Kawakowski. Detective Frank McCoy sends a snitch into the cell, and they're bragging about the murders of Piagetini and Jones, the BLA members who were locked up in San Francisco. So, and of course they have Jones, Waverly Jones is 38 in their possession with the Kawakowski attempted murder in San Francisco. So Frank McCoy calls up and gets, he goes, hey, look, I got this gun. Here's a serial number, because they left off a digit, either the H or in NCIC back then, and it wasn't popping. So he said, look, I gotta, and whoever he gets is like, nah, we don't have any, that matches that. So yeah, hangs up. McCoy gives his snitch, his CI hell, like, he was like, no, they're still talking about it. It gives him more detail. He calls back and he gets Detective Seffers, who's like, absolutely, that, what number? He gives him the number, goes, yes, that's Waverly Jones's gun hole, So Bill Seffers then heads out to San Francisco, gets into the cell, and he has a code name, in case things go bad with corrections. So corrections know that, hey, we have a friendly in the cell with the bad guys. Well, the BLA guys in the cell smell a rat. They think he's a plant, which he is. He's an undercover NYPD cop. And something goes wrong. Corrections comes in. Seffers is yelling the code word. They beat the living hell out of him, leave him in the cell. But now he has bona fides with the BLA guys. Like, well, he can't be in a plant. They just, they and then they divulge information to. So that's how Seffers got the information after taking the beating from the correction officers. But anyway,
no pain, no gain.
So now I called down to Atlanta and they say, no, Tom. So I'm like, nah, I wouldn't take no for an answer. I'm like, no, this is on the shelf. I says, whoever's writing this, there wasn't no author. I says, whoever wrote this has all the facts back and forth. He says, so he goes and he looks for, he goes, no, he goes, we had an officer, James Richard Green, that was killed on November 3rd, 1971. He was sitting in a van. I go, yeah, he had donuts and yeah. I said, okay, yeah. He goes, no, but the two guys responsible were killed by NYPD. I go, who are the two guys? He said, Twyman Myers. I go, yes. He goes, Freddie Hilton. I go, no, Freddie Hilton's in lockup right now in Brooklyn, for child molestation. So that reopened the case, and Don Haldeman, who was on the JTTF in New York, he was a special agent bomb tech. Don would open the case, to support the Atlanta PD, but he's like, look, I'm opening it, but we're gonna run it from Newark, from your hub. I'm like, yeah, whatever we got to do. So Don opened up what they call a 266 domestic terrorism investigation, and we worked it jointly. I spearheaded it, and Fred Marone was our director, who we lost in the World Trade Center. James Romito was the chief. They gave me the Port Authority helicopter. We flew around the Eastern Seaboard, talked to former BLA members who corroborated what was written, and further corroborated details of the homicide of Green. We got a couple of them to go down and testify, and James Richard Green Freddie Hilton was convicted of Green's murder. In doing so, I come across a BLA member who was cooperating, and he lays out these 21 crimes that were committed, and I look, and most of them solved either by trial, or the perps were shot and killed, but they, other witnesses corroborated this particular BLA member's stuff. So all of these crimes, heavy crimes, bank robberies, cop killings that he's talking about, all lay true. And of course, he breaks down the different cells of the BLA, how the BLA broke into cells from the Black Panthers. So I create this huge chart with cell members and the timeline, and everything is going accordingly, except for the fact that with the Foster and Laurie homicide, which this same BLA member gives information on how he learned about it, which was corroborated to be truthful and accurate. But the cells are not lining up, because they had Ronald Anderson and this one and that one out. And I'm like, wait a minute, they were picking tomatoes, and they were in the part of the Atlanta team. So I'm like, this is screwing up my whole theory. So I called Tom Nerney back up, and I'm like, Tom, I'm doing this thing for Atlanta. I said, the Foster and Laurie, it throws a wrench into the works. Everything this guy was talking about is true, except he's telling us that these three guys were involved, but the NYPD went in this direction. He goes, let me put you in touch with the case detective, Roy Artizone. So I get Roy on the phone, and he's like, kid, what's troubling you? So I go through the spiel with Roy. He goes, you're absolutely right. I go, but you had Ronald Anderson ID'd by the cab driver who drove from. He goes, no. He goes, Chief Seabird made us do staged photo arrays. So the photo arrays were staged, right, which was, of course, going to be a black guy if we went to trial. But I go, so it wasn't Anderson, Cooper, and he goes, no. He goes, who do you think? I go, I think it was Twyman Myers, Ronald Carter, and Robert Vickers. He goes, exactly. That's, I'm like, oh my goodness, So once I got that piece of the puzzle, now everything jives. Everything's, So I'm like, well, Vickers is still alive. We got to go after. So I put together, oh my God, I think 21 pages. I type up, and I try to sell it. It doesn't sell too well until Jerry Kane gets a hold of it. Sergeant Jerry Kane is working for Police Commissioner Bernie Carrick. Jerry comes over to my Newark office, and I'm like, look, here's what I got, and he sees all the Post-it notes and the whole, my wall covered and the whole, and he's like, oh my, and he's like, no, he goes, you got something here. He goes, I got to bring this back to the police commissioner. So he does, and he's like, well, he goes, no, he can't relate us to, he goes, have him come over and talk to the major case guys, and so they bring me over, and I meet Inspector Charlie Wells and Captain George Duke, and I do my spiel, and and they're like, okay, they're like, yeah, we got to go with this, but we want you assigned here. We don't want you just handing this. And Tom Nerney goes, it's what's in his head. I can't, so Tom's, credit, he's like, they're like, no, what do we got? What do we got to do to get you assigned here? I go, a 49, which is just, a memo. So they do a memo to the Port Authority, and then I'm co-assigned to the Major K Squad, but not without, hiccups and jealousies and egos. People try to stop it, from the JTTF New York, and it was a battle, and even some people in the NYPD weren't too happy with the assignment. Even though the commissioner said it, that doesn't mean that they have to agree with it. With the exception of, not for Charlie Rose or George Duke, they were just absolutely phenomenal. So I worked out in the Major K Squad. No, we did not solve it. The DA in Manhattan at the time said, you get me this, this, and this, and we'll go forward. I got them this, and this, plus some. It didn't happen. Dan Bibb had the case. And then at the same time, Dan and I were traveling, working Foster and Laurie. He was working the Palladium, redoing the Palladium homicide, which, he found the two people that were in jail for it did not take place in it. They did not take part in the homicide, but that's not what the DA wanted to hear. So Dan left the DA's office, unfortunately. And but however, I was fortunate enough later on to work with Detective Sean Foley from NYPD Intelligence. And Sean, an absolutely phenomenal detective. I would, give Sean 60 pages, to read and he would come back in a short time and be able to regurgitate, right on. I mean, he was just a phenomenal detective, and he was working up in Albany area where Robert Vickers was from. He was working with the Albany PD, narcotics, also doing. Sean did counterterrorism work. I helped him along with that part of his career, and we were able to get CIs into Vickers through Sean and through Albany PD, where Vickers is on tape bragging about, Foster and Laurie and how he was down in the village hiding. They got a CI to come down to the village with Vickers with a gun to shoot this drug dealer. So on an assassination, he went along with it. Talked about leaving a bomb-making manual, which we had in evidence with his fingerprints on it. He talks about leaving the bomb manual behind in 1972 after the murders. And the funny thing is, not funny, but he says, there were multiple BLA cells hiding in the village at that time, but he only mentions 3 people hiding that night, the night of the murders. He mentions himself, Carmen Myers, and Ronald Carter. Ronald Carter is killed, ironically, with Walker Laurie's gun in a St. Louis shootout, February of '72. So he's killed by Henry Shaw Brown, another BLA member, using Patrolman Laurie's service weapon. So Carter is killed. Of course, Myers is killed in the Bronx in a shootout with the NYPD Major K Squad and the FBI, and that leaves Robert Vickers. So he was never brought to trial or indicted on Foster and Laurie, but he was, and I testified at trial as well as Sean Foley in Albany. In my retirement, I went up to testify about what we uncovered on Foster and Laurie because Vickers introduced it at his drug trial in Albany. He said the only reason why I'm here is because, he mentions me by name and the NYPD targeting him for the Foster and Laurie homicide. So he opened the door for me and Sean to testify about what we had on Vickers in the homicides of Foster and Laurie. But so he's in jail now and where he belongs, and he has he's pretty sick. So hopefully he'll die in prison where he belongs.
Wow, man, I never heard. I knew of the case and I knew of some of the details, but I never knew about it to that degree. And I think when Jerry Kane was on, I think Jerry Kane talked about it a little bit with me, if I recall correctly. But to hear it in that detail, and Jerry did a great job of explaining it too. That was incredible. Thank you very much for telling me about that so in depth, like I said. So I guess, before I get to a little bit more of your time in JTTF and some of the investigations that would follow, a lot of these investigations stemmed from, of course, September 11th of 2001. And you were telling me a little bit about your day off the air before we began, but now for the audience, you can tell me about your day on the air. So I'll say, if you were on duty, that much I do know.
Yeah,
When did you get the call, and tell me?
No, I was in the major case squad. I was in my major case office at that time. We were on the 11th floor, and heard the explosion, which was the first aircraft coming in to the first tower. Looked out the window and seen a gaping hole, and knew it had to be an aircraft. Didn't assume terror, and just knew we had to get over there to basically redo what we did in '93. So myself, Tom Nerney, and John O'Boyle, detective from Major Case, responded over in my my FBI vehicle. So we got there, just minutes after the first plane had struck. Um, John and I introduced O'Boyle and Nerney to Sergeant Bobby Coffers from the Port Authority. Bobby's later killed in a collapse. But I didn't even know, even with all my time in the Trade Center and the Port Authority, I didn't know about the daycare center in the World Trade Center. John O'Boyle knew, and he inquired about it. He's like, to Bobby Coffers, he's like, "What about the kids?" And Bobby's like, "No, we got them out already, and we're in the process of getting them out." But Bobby had delegated a team to getting the kids out of the daycare center, and so we respond in, and I eventually make it to the police desk. I get a radio, where we're doing rescues from the plaza area as people are making their way down. The bodies are coming down at this time, like exploding on contact with the ground. One chief asked, like, what is that? And, because it sounded like small explosions. Like, chief, they're bodies. They're so he's like, oh my God, and when you got hit with it, it was like getting with body parts. It was like getting whipped in the legs. Just from the force. And unfortunately, we had matter all over our legs and everything. There was a guy definitely with a broken arm walking around saying he was the floor fire warden. He was definitely in shock. I tell Tom Nerney takes him. He's like, no, you got to get off because he's walking around the plaza where the bodies are coming down. Tom takes him. He fights with Tom. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Tom loses his shield. His shield is obviously from wrestling with this individual. Tom takes him off the plaza level, and we continue, and then we hear. I forgot, maybe from, I think, LaGuardia desk called and said there's a second plane en route, but like moments before it came in. So we didn't have that much time before the second plane came in. But the fireball, we seen that when it came into the tower. And there was reports, a sergeant reported on the radio that there was missiles fired from the Woolworth building, and I went outside where I'd previously seen Detective Kevin Barry and Detective Michael Mitchell from the bomb squad outside. And I'm like, did you see what was that? And they said it was a commercial aircraft, definitely a commercial aircraft. So I got on the radio and, said, no, be advised, 2 eyewitnesses, NYPD bomb squad detectives. It was a commercial aircraft that, just came in the second, and obviously we knew that we wanted to attack at that time. Unfortunately, later on, the conspiracy theorists, use that radio transmission to further their belief that, that bombs were planted on every other floor to take the buildings down, which is just completely ridiculous. But anyway, we get back in, continue doing the rescues. I'm in and out of the police. At some point, I'm on film in the police desk. And thank God I am, because the Port Authority did not help me in my retirement and with my disability by saying that I was in General Square that day. But anyway, I'm on film talking to Ron Nafee, who was the same one who orchestrated the children rescue in '93. Now he's a detective. So Ron and I together, John McLaughlin, who the movie The World Trade Center is about, him and Will Himno. John's getting dressed behind me into his fire bunker key, as we discussed. They were structural firefighters as well. So John's getting his bunker gear on. And there were a couple other guys on the same video that were, unfortunately, they were killed in the collapse. But when the first collapse happens, to be quite honest, we didn't know what it was. We just, you couldn't see inside Five World Trade Center. All there were these hundreds of little tornadoes, miniature tornadoes of debris. I mean, it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And obviously, you knew there was some kind of, catastrophic incident, but didn't realize that the tower had come down. And when you made it outside, I still say we went out one way. John O'Boyle says we went out another way. But who knows? But the only way you knew you were outside was the atmospheric change. You couldn't see. We both became part of the dust people. We covered head to toe with dust. In every orifice, the whole 9 yards. The first person I don't know if the first collapse or the second collapse, but person washed my eyes out with Snapple. So when I made it to an area where you could see, we set up a triage, actually I don't want to say temporary morgue, but there was up Church Street, maybe 99 Church Street. As we were running away, we tripped over bodies that were underneath the paper and all, and then we came back and retrieved those bodies and brought them up to 99 Church Street. And then some city boss asked, who, everything had to have a name, like who made this a temporary morgue, and they pointed to me. I'm like, no, it was just to get them off the street. So eventually, they took him out and got him to what was a temporary morgue, but we just took him into a building, to get him off the street, and then even though the first collapse had happened, we realized that we went back in. Now I'm looking for Nerney and O'Boyle. I don't know where they are. The second collapse happens, and I had just received a text from my daughter. I had an alphanumeric pager, and in the '93 bombing, being that I was in the local hospital, my wife's calling all the New York hospital to see if I'm there, and she's not finding me. So I was actually MIA for quite a number of hours, being I was in St. Francis in Jersey City, and I remember how frantic she was, and she's not easily excitable. My wife said she's a tough cookie from the project in Jersey City. So I didn't want that to happen again to her. So my daughter is, begging. She knows that I'm there. So we had no cell service. So I make it to a payphone. And when I get outside to make it to the payphone, that's when the second tower comes down. So I just exit onto Church Street again when the second tower comes down. Now after going back in, now I'm looking for Nerney or Boyle and all, and Chief Ali shows up from NYPD, Chief of Detectives, and I report Nerney and Boyle missing. I'm like, I don't think he made it, and Ali's very upset. And he's like, what do you, starts yelling, excitingly that, I'm like, sorry, we went in together, and we got separated, and I don't know where he is, So, but then of course later on I found out that he was, up at the morgue. His nickname was Dr. Nernbaum, Tom. So he was up at the morgue, doing God's work up there, And Jerry Kane was also asking and finding out, who was where, and so it wasn't until like hours later that or maybe at night, because I started, we started doing the digging for Himino and McLaughlin, the two cops that were buried alive. And that took us, into the night. And Danny Gardner, the guy who screamed at me in 9th Street, who carried me up the stairs, he's a detective now on the set. So I hook up with Danny on the site, on the pile, as we called it. And when we got Himino out, when the ESU and the rescue guys were down in the hole getting Will Himino out, once he came up to the top of the pile, I greeted him, and like we took him down, and Danny had to clear a path because of all the first responders, So Danny's just throwing blocks so we can wheel Himino up to 1 Liberty, where we had a triage, but they were thinking of amputating his leg at that time. So we got Will to the triage unit, and then we went back to work on McLaughlin, and then Will was eventually transported up to Bellevue, and I had one of my guys make sure they stayed in the ambulance with them, up to Bellevue, and then at some point in the wee hours of the morning, I just I either passing out or just completely exhausted. Danny Gardner's like, I'm bringing you home. My car was destroyed in the collapse, so Danny Gardner drove me home, and then I got a couple of hours shut eye and shower, changed, and back over working on a pile again.
And you mentioned Mixon and Barry, and again, those two guys came very, very close. So Mixon, especially, because I was just talking to Steve Burbridge the other day on the show for episode 199, and they were right outside 6. They were right outside the customs house because a couple of the guys from Port Authority Emergency Service had gone in with NYPD Emergency Service. Some firemen were in there too. Some bomb squad guys were in there too. And I think that they might have been not too far away from you when that collapse occurred, the secondary one. And so, yeah, you guys were very fortunate. And Ashley Banfield, who's a great reporter for News Nation, she's a friend of mine. She's been on the show. She was right in that same vicinity, too. And I remember her describing this when she was on the show, that she was about 30 blocks away when the first tower came down. But really, she was 2 blocks away when Tower 1 came down. She was with MSNBC at the time. And even 2 blocks away, she was saying, when it was coming down, it felt like it was coming down right at you. So I can't imagine it being even closer. If she was 2 blocks out and it felt like that, I can only imagine being right there. You guys are very, very fortunate to have survived that.
Extremely.
Yeah. So with the JTTF, man, we're at an hour and a half now. This show has really been flying by. We've been telling a lot of great stories. With the JTTF now, the mission changes, and it's now really the most elite unit you can be in the police department, on the detective bureau side, that is. And that's no disrespect, of course, to all the special operations units that do great work. And it takes you abroad, and I have a few photos of you abroad. And with this now, it's not just the manhunt for bin Laden, who was wanted anyway before 9/11, because he got indicted. A lot of people forget this because of how big 9/11 was. I think he was indicted in 1999 for his role in the embassy bombing, and that's his role in financing other attacks as well. So he's already wanted. But now you have other networks who are inspired by this, other members of bin Laden's network that you have to work to stop, along with federal agencies. A lot of it's classified, so don't tell me that. But as far as going to the source, going to the Middle East, and just working these investigations at home, in a post 9/11 landscape, especially 02, 03, right after, what was the anatomy of a terror investigation?
Well, as you said, that there were others that were we were looking for, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to be one, KSM, and others. I worked at the Amir Khanzi case, who killed the CIA people outside of their headquarters in Langley. I worked. So yes, there were a number of a number of terrorists that we were hunting at the time. I was fortunate enough to work for the legal attaché in Pakistan. Islamabad was called Chris Ryman, LEGAT for short. So they're the office that represents the FBI abroad, and they are throughout the world, and in different cities. So Chris was asking for me to come over there to work for him, because I had a CI, a confidential source network that was in that area of Baluchistan, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. And I had a well-developed source area. That's actually that's right outside of Tarnak Farms. That was the bioweapons lab that Bin Laden had developed right outside Tarnak Farms in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And those are the Canadian troops that escorted us on one trip. But so again, working for guys like Chris Ryman, and the thing is like FBI headquarters, because of the time difference and all, and the communications were lacking at the time. But that was to our advantage, because Chris would do things that would never be allowed to be done today, like for instance sending two of his TDYs, temporary duty, TDY you call. So Chris basically sent me and Don Borelli, Special Agent Don Borelli, to Afghanistan in February of '02. The black Taliban flags are still flying. Operation Anaconda had not kicked off yet. We lost a lot of guys on Anaconda. So we're there pre-Anaconda, during Anaconda. We could kind of delayed in our departure because of rightfully so, of the service members that have to be taken home in caskets. But that was because of guys like Chris Ryman and Jen Keenan was his ALAT. Bob Grenier was the CIA station chief, who Bob outed himself, so I'm not divulging any secrets here. Bob was a great guy to work with and to work for, and it really worked. It worked the way it's supposed to work. The DEA, I remember Mike Brown and a couple other guys with the DA office over there. I mean, it really came together. Because when you're in Afghanistan, all right, we're in charge as far as the U.S. The military, the CIA. They're in charge of Pakistan. You're working on the permission of the Pakistani government.
Right.
So you just like when Daniel Pearl was kidnapped, we were getting ticklers, from FBI Newark. One agent, she was saying, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And she was fairly new. We're like, it doesn't work like that. You just can't run around Pakistan and
Have you seen this
knock
man?
on doors.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everything has to be liaison through, the Pakistan and ISI. Their CIA, FBI services, the whole 9 yards, and it's all permission. It's all Can we do this? Can we do that? And part of I don't want to say barriers, because that would be too strong of a word, but part of the hurdles to get over. That one thing was I bought Donald McIntyre's handcuffs with me. Donald was killed in the towers. I kind of broke Donald in as a cop down the path when he came down. So his wife gave his handcuffs were recovered from from his belt from the trunk of a vehicle at the Trade Center. His wife Janine gave him to his partner Paul Nunziato, who gave him to me, and I brought Donnie's handcuffs with me over to Pakistan. And part of this, like, prior to raids, we called them raids when we go into a safe house or a house where we thought where bad guys were. We would meet and discuss how we're going in, who's going where, back and forth. And it was always Pakistanis first. They would go through the stuff and all, and then give it to us to look at the whole 9 yards. But we were always secondary, because it's their country, it's their rules. Right. Well, when I bring Donnie's handcuffs over, it so happens that People magazine does a story on the women who gave birth after 9/11, who of course were pregnant during 9/11. Janine McIntyre is featured in the People magazine with young Donald's picture, Donald's son, with his dad's police hat on. Lauren, who was born, and so I purchased, 6 or 7, whatever they had magazines at the newsstand in Islamabad. I purchased them. I bring them to the safe house meeting, the pre-raid meeting, and I passed them out and I show them to our Pakistani counterparts. I'm like, this is Donnie Mack, because he had Mack engraved on his handcuffs. So they understood that the cuffs came from Ground Zero, that it belonged to a deceased Port Authority police officer, Mack. They all call him Mack. Now they see a picture of his widow, his children, the whole 9 yards, and it just like So that raid that night, the colonel in ISI is like, Tom, you're going in first. So we were able to we were able to go into this raid, and the agency person who was there went back and told like Bob Grenier, like, this is fantastic. We're getting in first. We're going to have first eyes on it. We're going to be able to grab the stuff that we need. Blah blah blah. And it just became a heavy part of what we were doing over there. Fast forward, after we do numerous raids and the months that I'm there, I come back. I'll get back to Pakistan and Afghanistan, but when I come back, I get a call from the CIA, and they said, hey, the colonel and the general are coming to Washington to meet, but then they're going to I said, well, I'll be in DC for Police Week. Now every Memorial Week we go down to honor our fallen, and of course that's the year that all the cops' names, NYPD, Port Authority, the federal, the court officers, all law enforcement killed that year, going on the wall. So the colonel who I work with very closely from ISI, a general and all, meet us at the. I arranged for them to return the handcuffs to Janine McIntyre, the widow of Donald McIntyre, at the wall. So they meet us, and they return the handcuffs, and they got a chance to meet Janine and all. And the colonel looks up, and he's got a tear on his cheek. I'm like, wow, this guy killed more people than cancer, and here he is, and then of course afterwards they came back and spent some significant time with us. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to besmirch their beliefs but yeah, they spent a significant time with us, and it went a long way. It went a very long way. But yeah, so I depends upon where you're at. If you're at the behest of the country you're currently in, or and then if you're on the other side, like with Afghanistan, we're like, no, we know where we want to go. We had the doctor that was developing this bioweapons lab, and they said they couldn't find it and all, and he took us right to it, and we processed that, and of course, it has to be those, there's only two of us who could actually stand up in court and testify, in open court. So we had to recover everything. You can't use the military folks or the CIA. So that's how it had to work, and that's what we did. And then, of course, the picture you showed was March 17th, St. Patty's Day. Because of the conditions you worked with the legal attache's office, it was hard to get onto a computer to do your work. And, you share one computer with all the TDYs. You had the Pearl kidnapping, which was a McGilla. You had, so where they're doing an R&R trip to the mountains. And I begged Chris Ryman, the LIGAT, to leave me behind so I can hog the computer and knock out all my paperwork from, prior raids that we did, and evidence that has to be shipped back stateside. It has to be done in secure pouches. The whole process has to be done. But look, to Sunday, I could use, the whole day to get caught up. And he's like, okay. So I lay back, to work at the embassy. That's why, those pictures, I'm in jeans and a big American flag on my T-shirt, because I was supposed to just be, locked in the embassy that day doing paperwork. But on the way over, Mike Evanoff is the RSO from the State Department, Regional Security. He's the head State Department guy there. Mike's a great guy. Again, working underneath those guys, it was just fabulous the way it's supposed to work. Mike flags me down. He sees me coming over, and they recognize the embassy car, so he flags me down as we follow the ambulances. Lo and behold, we get inside the green zone to the embassy where all the embassies are, and it was a church bombing. A suicide homicide bomber came in with grenades and a palms mine. It turned out. So we get there, the place is still on fire. People are still coming out, wounded, and they're carrying, some of the deceased to like a pickup trucks. We beat the ambulances there actually. And then a Brit, Mark Story, comes out carrying an American child. Mark's wounded. The child is wounded, and he says, you have unexploded grenades, an unexploded grenade in the church. So I go into the church and I locate, I see the grenade and I tell everybody to get out. Of course, some listen, some don't. The colonel, the Pakistani colonel, calls, and I guess he actually was there. They put me on the phone with them, and I'm like, Colonel, I said, I got a grenade in the church. I said, I need you guys out. Again, we're in their town, their home, so he gets on the phone with the head of the police that were there, and of course they're going to listen to a colonel from ISI. So they evacuate the church. I had done a raid previously to that in Peshawar. So I work with the CIA ordnance removal teams. They show up, and I said, "Hey, look, I'll take you in. I got an unexploded grenade and all." So we go in, and they find 2 additional. A total of three unexploded Soviet F-1 grenades. Rendered those safe. They rendered them safe, not me. They rendered them safe, and basically I go back in and process the scene. And Chris and the rest of the team makes their way down from the R&R in the mountains. They were in the Murray Mountains. They made their way back, to Islamabad. But like I said, we lost American a mother and daughter. Christina Walmsley was 17 years old. Barbara Green worked at the State Department. She was killed. Her husband was injured. Her son was injured. And it was pretty sad time.
I'll get to the concluding segment in a moment. I have a few more photos I want to share, and then one more question before the concluding segment that I want to ask you. This is from Ground Zero. This is the infamous beam, the Port Authority Police Department 37, NYPD 23. And John Latanzio actually told me that when he was on this show for my emergency service unit miniseries, he was the one that put the NYPD 23 up there. Which was very emotional when he told me about it. It almost made me cry, so I didn't forgive him for that. It took me a while to forgive him for that. It almost making me cry on the show. Another angle of that beam, another angle of Ground Zero. But I think this just about sums it up. This was right after, and
yeah, that's my vehicle there with the trunk popped. That's my FBI vehicle.
It's like the one that's popped all the way up, or the one that's slightly popped?
No, the one that's slightly popped. The one closest to us, looking at it.
Yeah, the haunting thing is that 6 World Trade right there.
No, it's 5. That's
okay, it's
like
5.
Yeah, that's Church and VC, the corner of Church and VC.
The thing when you sent me this photo that I couldn't stop thinking about is right in that right in the corner there, that emergency service vehicle that I see there. Given how many guys ESU lost today, they lost 14. And I think Port Authority ESU lost an additional 7. God, I don't know which truck that is specifically, but I see. Go ahead.
I believe we lost 13 ESU.
13 emergency service cops from the Port Authority Police of the 37 who were killed that day. But I don't know which emergency squad that is specifically, but I see all that equipment that's taken off and whatnot. And I shudder to think, I hope those guys made it out, whoever it was that rode it on that truck, but I don't know if they did.
Yeah.
So you retired in 2014. The question that I'll ask you before we get to the rapid fire is, a lot of people are talking, as you saw this discussion, especially last year in the lead up to the 20th anniversary going on. A lot of people are talking about the next one, and it doesn't necessarily have to involve aircraft or play out exactly as that date did. It could be another big incident. You were on the forefront of counterterrorism for many, many years. When you look at not only New York's capabilities, by extension America's, to thwart off the next big one, Are you concerned for where the country's at with that? Or are you optimistic? What
Yes,
do you think?
yeah, very concerned because one of the sergeants I work with coined it perfectly. Um, he said, the further we get away from 9/11, the closer we're getting to 9/10. And whether it's complacency or ignorance, which is huge. I mean, I don't want to point fingers at anybody specifically, but I mean, it just, uh, the old adage, if you forget, it's going to reoccur, and but it's true. The further we get away from 9/11, the closer we get to 9/10. We can't let our guard down. We have to do more. They don't forget. They came back. They plotted. Twice with the Holland and Lincoln Tunnel. They're going to come back. It may not be the same exact group. Yeah, the, the compartmentalization hurts us. When you have to squeeze him into a category. He's Al Qaeda, or he's Taliban. And then to put the blinders on. It hurts us. It wasn't the same guys that came back in 9/11 that who did it in '93. Right. Common denominator is Ramzi Youssef, yes, as far as, and he's Iranian, by the way. He's a Baluch Iranian as well as Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So all this stuff about Kuwait and this and that, and maybe that's where he was born, the whole 9 yards, but he's 1,000, and admittingly so, he's an Iranian Baluch, and his blood uncle is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I can get into that at another time. As far as I had sources who were giving me this, I was shut down, quickly by the New York office, and then later on, they uh, admitted that they were wrong. But anyway, so absent, Ramzi Youssef and the guys who came back in 9/11, we're not not the same crew from or the same organization as '93. So we shouldn't pigeonhole ourselves, and they don't forget. If the fatwa is issued, and it could be their grandchildren that come back. But I mean and it doesn't have to be elaborate. I don't want to discuss what some of the plans were for the Holland and Lincoln Tunnel, but it wasn't elaborate, and they you've seen with the bridges in New York, what they try to do as far as cutting the cables and the whole 9 yards. You can't let our guard down, can't and it doesn't have to be as elaborate as the 9/11 plan was.
Just a quick question from the chat, then I'll get to the rapid fire. Steve Zaslavsky wants to know if you ever worked with Mossad or other foreign intelligence agencies.
With who?
With Mossad or other foreign intelligence agencies.
Not that I know of. I mean, other foreign intelligence agencies, yes. The Brits, and of course ISI intimately. Mossad, no. And Special Branch in Trinidad and Tobago. I was work with them there, So yes.
You Dizzy 1969, I appreciate you. Says this has been another great show. Mike C, what an awesome guest. Thank you, Detective Tom McHale, for sharing your time and stories. Thank you, Dizzy, and everybody else for watching tonight. And on that note, of course, leads us into the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. Of course, you can say pass if you want. Are you ready?
Yes.
Now, the first question, I'm going to switch up a little bit because you loved working in New York. Obviously, primarily you worked in New York. So I'll say, when you were in Jersey, when you were stationed in Jersey, favorite spot to work in Jersey, and when you were in New York City, or just New York in general, besides the 6th precinct in that area, favorite spot to work in New York?
Well, the New Jersey would be Newark. Working the Penn Station in Newark, and New York City. Working from the World Trade Center, up to the south. So wherever the crime took you. I mean, so I actually. It may sound corny, but driving from Jersey over the Pulaski Skyway, I would look at the World Trade Center and look at the Empire State Building and say, that's my patrol route. That, and as like I said, as corny as it sounds, I would drive it every night, and I absolutely enjoyed going to work. I love my time in patrol. We had a great time. We worked hard, and we shared a lot of laughs.
Second, I don't know how much experience you had with Middle Eastern cuisine in your time over there on investigations, but favorite Middle Eastern dish if you have one.
Well, it wouldn't be Middle Eastern. It would, it would be Kabuli lamb and eggplant dish. It was absolutely. In 2008, I had dinner at Hekmat Karzai's palace. And my birthday, and they had a birthday celebration. And yeah, I mean, I had some of the most delicious tasting eggplant that I've ever had. But Kabuli lamb and eggplant.
Third funniest call you ever responded to?
I wouldn't say the funniest, but what comes to mind is we get a call for a disturbance at Christopher Street in front of the station, and we roll up and we park halfway on the sidewalk so we don't block traffic. Narrow street by Christopher, and there's a disturbance of these transvestites just finished a Vogue dancing, and they were angry at the person who won the championship and a huge trophy, So they were going at it, and we pull up. My partner was a frustrated psychiatrist, so we get out, and he's like, well, we calm it down and all. He's like, well, what happened? He goes, well, she should, and of course they're all guys, but she should have won. He goes, well, show me why you think you should have won. So now they placed the trophies on the hood of our patrol car, right? Picture this. So now the trophies on the hood of our patrol car, and they're doing all these Vogues, and my partner is like shaking his head in agreement, like, oh, I see back. But I mean, it calmed it right down. With this, sergeant passes by, Vinny Perniola, hysterical guy. He goes, I'm not even going to ask. I'm not, and he just keeps going. I mean, people have to back us up, but when he sees what's going on, and they're having a small recap of their Vogue competition with their trophy on, and I'm just going like, oh my God, can we just get at it, but that kind of stifled the argument, and my partner said, yeah, you should have won, and he took his trophy, or she took his trophy and went that way, and that was it. Like, not the funniest, but it's the one that comes to mind.
That's the highlight of the show. Of all the stories you told, that's the one I'm picking. That's the one I'm picking for when I put out the highlight clip tomorrow morning. That wins. And that one last second. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Oh, it has to be Connolly's on 45th Street.
There you go. All right.
They St. Patty's Day, the first St. Patty's Day after 9/11. Of course, I was in Pakistan. When I come back, so it will be 03, my first parade. These widows and children who used to see their dads walk up Fifth Avenue were no longer walking up Fifth Avenue. I'm like, what are we going to do? So I just go in and I see the owner and one of the guys who used to work with at the bus terminal, Billy Sullivan. I'm like, he goes, no, bring them back here to the second floor. We cordon off an area for you. So we did that, for the widows who partook in the parade every year, and then that became like an annual tradition, for quite a few years, quite many years, where Connolly's would just contribute, do that, for our widows and kids. So, but it's also great Irish bar, good Irish food, and Connolly's on 45th Street.
And the last question, I'm going to let my man Ryan take it here. Ryan Metter, of course. Mike, he says he wanted me to squeeze this in. Any advice for a new investigator / detective?
Investigator. Okay, I thought you said new police officer. I would say join the fire department. New investigator. Go with your gut and that hair in your neck. Don't take no for an answer. The cases that I came across that I mentioned, and it was just. Persistence. It's like when when you're first told, something doesn't exist, or just keep digging. Just be persistent. It's going to annoy a lot of people. People take your persistence the wrong way, like you're trying to prove them wrong or show them up, which is not true at all. You just trying to get to the truth and trying to solve the case. You're definitely gonna step on toes. There's no doubt about it. Toes are gonna be stepped on. Black eyes heal. So just keep at it. That's that's my best advice.
Thank you so much for this. This was great. Stick around. We'll say goodbye off the air. Before I say goodbye to the audience and I plug a next show that's coming up, is there any shout outs you want to give to anyone or anything?
Everybody who's said hello, and especially Jerry Kane and Billy Ryan. Of course, I remember Billy from A&E when I was working in the major case squad. In fact, John Faust was working with Detective John Faust was working with in arson and explosion when he stops a detective from throwing out a file cabinet that just Detective Joe Tidmarsh from back in the 70s created file indices with all the Black Panthers and the BLA, with associated crimes, Wetified and DD5s. I mean, he did a whole index card file cabinet, manual indices, and this detective, more like a translator, was going to throw this in the garbage. And John Faust had got wind of me coming up to work with Foster and Laurie, and intercepted the hand truck with the file cabinet and took it into the A&E squad until I got there, and said, hey, can you use this? And it was just a treasure trove of information that was extremely helpful in solving not only Foster and Laurie, but helping San Francisco with their open case on the Sergeant John Young, which I worked with San Francisco, and Detective John Faust. Thank you.
Thanks to John. Hopefully, I can have John on the show for my Bomb Squad / Arson Explosion miniseries. Billy Ryan's been trying to help me out with that. So thanks to everybody that watched tonight. Coming up next on the Mike and Maven podcast, I'm working to confirm it, and if I don't have him, then obviously I'll try to get somebody else. But it should be for another volume of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit, Charlie DiLaccio, who worked in One Truck for most of his ESU career, notwithstanding, I should say, flying to other trucks for a day. He was primarily assigned to Truck 1, which is in Lower Manhattan. So that should be Friday's show. If not Charlie, if I can't get a confirmation from him, I'll figure something out. But tentatively, it should be Charlie DiLaccio for the E-Men miniseries. In the meantime, of course, on behalf of Detective Tom McHale, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Have a great rest of your night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, as always, and stay safe. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.